And then it just, there you go. There you go, live.
Hi everyone, I am Lisa Moore and this is State of the Arts. This is our fourth broadcast and I'm very lucky to have Dr. Sean McGrath here as my guest today. State of the Arts is a program, a monthly broadcast, a Facebook Live event where we talk to different professors from the Humanities and Social Sciences here at Memorial University and talk about their research and their teaching and what motivates them and what drives them and why they're here, why we're all here, and particularly how that research is important to us at this moment in history and time and space when everything is changing under our feet. So, Sean McGraw is the head of the philosophy department here at Memorial University, and he was born in St. John's. He is the co-founder of FANE, which is For a New Earth, a nonprofit organization that is looking to protect the environment.
Protect us from ourselves in Newfoundland and Labrador and raise the consciousness.
Yep, yes. Nothing small about this nonprofit. We're going to change the world.
Well, we might just change some people's minds in Newfoundland and Labrador. How about that? We'll start small.
That's a start.
Baby steps,
That's a
right?
good start.
Baby steps.
So Sean was born in St. John's. He did his undergraduate degree at MUN and the University of Ottawa, and he spent 5 years in a monastery, which I'm hoping we're going to talk about, and then did his PhD at U of T, the University of Toronto, in both philosophy and theology. Is that right?
Sort of.
Go ahead, fix it.
So there was a PhD in philosophy at the U of T, and then there was a PhD in theology much more recently from a European school.
That's two philosophies. Two PhDs.
That's right.
That's two PhDs,
Yeah.
Sean. That's
Yeah,
a lot of PhDs.
Apparently it's a personality disorder.
Okay. So what I really want to get at, I want to get at a lot of things here, but I really want to talk about, how, to begin, how that time in the monastery might have inspired you to go into philosophy.
Yeah. It's a little bit the other way around. See, I was studying undergraduate philosophy, and
Right.
It was the philosophy that inspired me to go to the monastery. So I as a young man, I was gripped by a sense that there was or there needed to be a religious sense of life, or there was something to religion. And I was interested in all religions, particularly Eastern religions. So I took a semester off, went to India, 1987, backpacked around, visited the holy sites of Buddhism, and then came back, finished my philosophy degree, got very, very serious indeed about this problem of the religious sense of life. And it was the study of philosophy at MUN. There were some great professors there. Most of them are retired now, but at MUN, the study of philosophy and the tripping around India and visiting monasteries and holy sites, that convinced me that this religious sense of life is real, and that theory is not adequate to access it. This is not something we approach through theory or through ordinary reasoning or through academic studies. That's why I went into the monastery.
Okay, so what philosophers were you working with before the monastery, or what do you mean when you say that theory is not enough? What theoreticians are you thinking of?
Well, Wittgenstein, for example, wherever we can speak, there we can speak clearly. Wherever we cannot speak, there we ought to remain silent. And once we implement this rule of clear speaking, Wittgenstein concludes, we will in fact not be able to speak about anything that really matters to us. All the ethical questions will have to be will remain in silence, and we'll deal with scientific questions and with the rules of discourse about scientific questions. That's the early Wittgenstein. I was entirely floored by this. Spinoza was also on the agenda, Schopenhauer, existentialism, Kierkegaard, Nietzsche, the standard undergraduate angst canon was my world. Yeah.
And when you were in India, and I imagine that was before cell phones.
It really was.
I was actually in India at the same time.
Were you?
I think so, yeah.
The India that's gone, yeah.
It is a very different place now.
It is, yeah.
Do you remember things that altered you or changed you forever from that time? Like, were there moments?
I certainly remembered being changed forever. I was 20 years old. I went a certain kind of person. I came back a different person. So exactly what happened there, I'm not sure. But to travel around a place like India in 1987 for 4.5 months when you're 20, alone, is inevitably going to have an impact, and it did. So I think one of the things that I did come back with, I was very intensely on the quest of the Buddha. I loved the Buddha, and I love Buddhism, and I still do. And I found myself not able to penetrate it. And I very much sympathized and understood T.S. Eliot, another one of my heroes at the time. I did an English degree and a philosophy degree. T.S. Eliot, of course, started his career studying things Eastern, including Buddhism, at Harvard University. And at a certain point, he broke it off. And he said, this is a paraphrase, but at a certain point, it became clear to him that to go further down this path would be for him to somehow annihilate himself as a European, or to disavow his European heritage. And that he wasn't quite ready to do. And this is precisely the position I was in at the age of 20 when I came back and really started to study philosophy. That is, I didn't know who I was as a descendant of Europeans, as an ostensibly Catholic kid. How could I sign on to this entirely different package and even do it responsibly? And I was also really, what should I say, disenchanted by the Westerners visiting the temples and the ashrams. Mm-hmm. Something didn't strike me as authentic there. Their desire was authentic, but what the product of it appeared to me to be derivative. So for that reason, I came back and I said, I've got to study myself. That is, I've got to study this culture, this heritage that I've come from, in which I've really spent no time at. I knew much more about Hinduism and Buddhism than I did about Christianity and Judaism, for example. And yet that was the grammar of my discourse, was Jewish Christian. Right?
Mm-hmm. So then, recently, with the writing you're doing now, you're really thinking about ecology.
I am.
And it was that a leap?
No.
Or no? So how does an interest in ecology grow out of that early struggles with Western civilization and philosophy?
Mm-hmm.
And
well, I was equally attracted by wilderness. I mean, I had this kind of simultaneous attraction to the religious sense of life, whatever that was, a conviction that it was found through things like meditation, contemplation, rather than academic study. And I could not get enough of the wilderness. I could not be alone enough in the woods. So I was a real outdoorsy kid, And when I was doing my undergrad at philosophy here, I spent all my time tramping around the woods, or hiking, or canoeing with my companion, who was a golden retriever. I was actually considering, just doing the hermit thing, like another one of my heroes, Henry David Thoreau, at the time. And so there was this sense that, this religious sense of life can't be accessed through the academics, but it's revealing itself to me in the wilderness. I was very much a pantheist. I could feel the divine in the woods and the waters, and especially when I was alone. And for that reason, I became interested in communities who were living contemplative lives in the woods, and found one in Nova Scotia and went and joined them. Spent 5 years. Actually went on retreat for Christmas with a bag for 2 weeks and stayed for 5 years. That was really something. And it was always bound up with this sense that something terrible was happening to nature. It had to do with development, it had to do with technology, and it had to do with the way we have become abstracted from a certain, let's say, natural sense of divinity, or a sense of even just the consolation and comfort of knowing that we belong to a earth community. It seemed to me, in peril. And for that reason, there was always an environmental interest in my religious life.
But it seems to me that the people that you're reading, some of them, are really against a kind of notion of the sublime, a kind of notion of the wilderness as a text that we can read and understand something about divinity. And that, in fact, really, you've written about the ecology without nature,
Mm-hmm.
and how there's that nature now is really a set of webs or systems that are all about technology, and that we are responding to a sort of technological kind of nature, and that there is no way, if ever there was, back to a wilderness. Am I reading it right?
Not at all. No, you're reading it correctly.
Oh,
Yes.
good. Phew.
Yes, absolutely. Well, first of all, it's some years later. So we're talking about 20-year-old
Right.
romantic and 51-year-old post-romantic, recovered romantic, right? So some things have happened along the way.
I don't know if you're entirely recovered.
Well, working on it. You know? I have a group that I meet with, and we talk it out. And I'm very interested in this ecology without nature movement. I got interested in it several years ago when I was working quite intensely on psychoanalysis. That was sort of the in-between thing. You know, after the monastery and the academic career came many years studying psychoanalysis, being analyzed, working in psychoanalysis, becoming very conscious of the ways in which what I call reality is really my neuroses disavowed and projected onto the screen of the world. So there was a process of reclaiming certain things. And among the things that had struck me as somewhat less than truthful was this youthful romanticism in which I turned to nature as to my God, as to a divine being that could, rescue me or comfort me. I don't think that's what nature really is. And I think it was that in different parts of our history, and maybe for different peoples even today. But for us, now, that isn't what nature is doing. And so when people speak about nature in that way, they're speaking ideologically in the strong Marxist sense of the word. That is, they're saying something that's on some level they know is not true. We're not contained by a cosmos anymore. If it's geoengineering or mapping the human genome or simply the ubiquity of human technology on the earth, you can go to Papua New Guinea and find a little tribe and pretend that you're somewhere outside of the century and the planes are still flying over you, and you can probably find a picture of yourself on Google Earth. So there's a necessary kind of denial of our contemporary situation that's bound up with this romanticized notion of nature as some kind of wilderness that contains us, or a cosmos that contains us. So I was very interested in these theoreticians, the ecology without nature folks, who were taking that on and saying environmentalism really needs to wise up. We've had, 50 years of environmentalism, and the world's getting worse. Obviously, there's something wrong here, and we're dealing with a fantasy and not with the truth of nature. So they'd say things like, I remember Zizek has this wonderful video where he's in a dump. He's saying, if you're an environmentalist, you should love all this trash. He's picking through the trash and showing all the refuse, the discarded other side of our consumer lifestyle. I was very struck by that, and I still am. So, so there's no more cosmocentric nature for us, and we are disenchanted. Max Weber said it, and I believe it's entirely true. We can't go back to, let's say, a kind of consciousness which maybe was prevalent in ancient societies, ancient India, for example, ancient Greece, a sense of the cosmos as divine in a certain sense, with a logos at the center of it, and the human being as a member in this whole. That you get this metaphor of nature as an organism, and we're a part of that. And that can be very consoling, because such a person has a place in the world. Such a person doesn't suffer the existential angst, for example, that I was so acutely suffering when I was 20. That angst is a symptom of no longer belonging to such a cosmos. So,
and now we're in a place where it is possible that all of humanity is just like a fold in a huge span of time, and that we could be over in 100 years, some people say.
That's right.
So that is a good opportunity for us to talk about For a New Earth.
Sure.
What is it you want to do with because what I'm wondering is a bunch of things. Can philosophy help us as we explore the Anthropocene? And maybe you could talk about the Anthropocene, and you could talk about how philosophy can help us, and then you can talk about the very practical things that you're doing.
Sure. Yeah, the Anthropocene was an interesting term 5 years ago, and it was coined in 2002, but it sort of came on the radar about 5 years ago. And at that point, it was a great shorthand term for describing the situation of the human civilization under climate change, right? And I think it still is. And then there's been, of course, a discussion about it. Is it a scientific term, the geographical society weighing in? Are we really describing a proper stratification, level of stratification? The term is intended to mean that one species on the Earth, which happens to be the human species, has uniquely stepped out of the balance of things and become a geological force. We're actually affecting the whole planet on a kind of geological scale, akin to the meteorite that hit the Earth 64 million years ago and wiped out the dinosaurs. So we are no longer in a situation where we can continue to live with that romantic sense of being at the heart of a cosmos, because a part of a whole doesn't have that kind of influence on the whole. So the term then is a wake-up call, really. It can be spun in two ways. You can take it as the humiliation of the human being. As you say, perhaps 100 years from now there won't be any more human life on Earth, and who knows? Maybe there's no human life anywhere else. This might be the end of the story, right? And yet, whatever we pointed to when we talked about nature clearly will go on without us. It doesn't need us. Humiliation. And it can also be the exaltation. There's others who have taken it in this sense. Now we are in charge. We are really responsible. We are the masters of the Earth. We can geoengineer our future. We can colonize space, all of this stuff. So it's a very ambiguous term. And for that reason, I think it's an excellent term. It's like a symbol, It's overdetermined. It's not a very good scientific term. I'm going to take I'm going to follow the science on that, and there's something wrong with that as a scientific term. But as a symbol for our situation, it's perfect. We can no longer pretend that we are one part of a larger planetary whole. There's a new conception is needed.
And so what does philosophy do for us? And how did you move from all of this reading and thinking and acting to creating this foundation that you're hoping will affect change?
Yeah. What does philosophy do? Well, philosophy doesn't do very much, really. I mean, it's not all that effective, generally speaking. It was, aside from a few mavericks like Marx, it never really desired to be all that effective. Philosophy is intrinsically contemplative, right? It's reflective. So if there's a contribution for philosophy, it's to clarify the situation. So in the research I'm doing now, I'm very interested in seeing how we can clarify, let's say, certain concepts of nature which no longer work. Like we talked about cosmos, the organism, the organic whole. This was a major metaphor for early environmentalism. It no longer works in the Anthropocene. But there was another notion that succeeded in early modernity, which is the notion of mechanism, right? Nature as a mechanism. That is a machine which we could take apart and do things that we would like it to do. And this also, I think, has come to an end. I think breakthroughs, for example, in quantum physics have made it clear that we don't really know what we're doing with nature when we take it apart, so to speak, and reassemble it. Or let's talk about the human genome. I mean, the real fear here is that, well, yeah, sure, we might end up with people who can do really good math, but they may be monsters, maybe they have no conscience or something. We don't know what will happen when we tinker with these things. So the organic whole is gone, the mechanism is gone, and we're left in this amazingly fertile situation of having no adequate concept of nature. And yet, we still talk about nature. Not the professors of philosophy at the Sorbonne, maybe, but ordinary folks, policymakers, environmental activists. It is not just it continues to be an important trope. It is the guiding trope. You can't imagine environmental discourse without it, at least in real environmental discourse, the stuff that's happening in the public sphere. So philosophy, I'm hoping, can offer some kind of tools, or perhaps even go forward and construct a concept of nature for the future. So that's on the academic side. On the For New Earth is not meant to be an academic initiative. It's a public initiative. So I did not want to contribute to an interdisciplinary field called environmental ethics and go to conferences and earn points, and expand my CV with this issue. It seems to me like kind of obscene to start a society, an academic society around an emergency. So I wanted to go into the public with this, and it's been very exciting. So it's only 3 years now that we really started going public. The first event was in Grossmore, and you were there in 2015. And since then, things have really accelerated quite a bit. So we've decided with FAIN, For a New Earth, to, rather than focusing on a particular environmental issue, let's say, oceans or climate change, we would focus on the whole thing. That is, we would take a holistic, to use an overused term, approach to a holistic discipline, which is ecology. And we're very much inspired, I think, in this regard by Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si, where he speaks about integral ecology. What he meant by integral ecology, and it was striking to me that this encyclical came out right when we were starting FAIN. And integral ecology means that actually we cannot specialize this issue. We cannot be left to sciences, the hard sciences, for a fix, nor is it something for big governments to do. This is something that implicates all of us. In this sense, ecology has something akin to the religious, in the sense that the religious includes everything, right? It includes the meaning of the individual, their moral life, the political systems that they participate in or don't participate in, and their understanding of the destiny for all of us. Ecology touches all of that, doesn't it? It touches everything. And so integral ecology deploys all human resources for the sake of addressing the civilizational emergency we're in. So we don't just need natural scientists. We certainly need them. We also need people who do religious studies. We need people who do economy, political economy. We need psychologists. We need to understand, for example, why are we so addicted to consumerism, which is, everybody agrees, the real culprit. Our addiction to shopping is probably going to doom the human race. And that's kind of an amazing cultural neurosis that we're involved in. So everyone needs to be on board there. And we need not just a small fix here and there, a carbon tax, whatever. We need a civilizational shift, something on the scale of, let's say, the ancient world becoming Christian, which was an enormous, whatever else you think about it, was an unprecedented, enormous world event, without which our existence here is unthinkable. Something on that scale has to happen. So For a New Earth then aims at what we call ecological conversion, which means not just individuals taking responsibility, but communities taking responsibility for the situation, and not being demoralized by the gravity of the problem. You can listen to all the eco-panic talk and the climatology and so on and just go, oh, nothing for me to do, and despair. And I saw this in the face of the students that I taught for years in environmental philosophy, just this look of blank despair, which on the one hand, it's alarming and disturbing. On the other hand, it's also politically demobilizing. Desperate people don't do anything. When we talk about real despair, I mean the kind of soul-withering despair in which you see no possibility, you don't become politically engaged. So we need to start counteracting that. And that's why FAIN has this aggressively hopeful edge to it. I would say eschatological edge. We want to talk about the future of the earth. We want to talk about a possible future of human beings on the earth and a possible future justice for the earth. And we need everybody on board. So one of the things we've been doing a lot of is kind of acting like a conduit of information. There's a lot of brilliant ecology happening at MUN, as you know. Not a lot of it gets out into the pubs or into the committee meetings of government or into the local newspaper. What we've been doing is sort of bringing all of that ecological thinking into the public sphere, either in the context of a meeting, a town hall session, a conference, really anything goes there. And on the other hand, also bringing the public together in a kind of community building activity of thinking about how we'd like our place to look. What do we love here and what would we like to protect? And this community building part is really important to me. I mean, one of the things I wanted to say about the monastery is that I went there thinking I wanted to be alone with the alone. This is Plotinus. And I discovered that it's all about community. That what I discovered was that I'm nothing without a community. I discovered a community of brothers and sisters that supported me in everything. And we need to build communities, right? We need people to get together and start to associate around these issues.
So we began this talk with a trip to India.
Yeah.
And I know you've recently just gone to Labrador.
Yeah.
And held just that kind of a meeting.
Yeah.
Just that kind of a conference, a gathering of people about Muskrat Falls. Yeah. And I want to ask you what you learned there, if anything surprised you, and what was validated that you already knew. What did you take back from that, and what do you think needs to happen there?
Well, the first thing I learned is that growing up in St. John's, Newfoundland, is a situation of obscurity and darkness about the north of our province. We just don't know anything about Labrador, and we continue to talk about it in complete ignorance of the place, in ignorance of the human communities that live there, in ignorance of the non-human communities, the size of the place, the problems of the place. It's just that we're in a situation of culpable ignorance about our north. And I think that's probably repeated all across the country. And this is, you want to look for Canada's abuse situations, you look north, right? So I learned a lot about Labrador and the way it has been ignored and neglected in this mega project, which is probably the worst thing that's ever happened to this community, to this province since 1949. So that was an eye-opening situation.
Or 1933.
Yeah, that's right. We'll go back a little further, won't we? What else? Continues, did you see the news? The environmental assessment reports come out. Another 800 million or so needed to make that basin clear of debris so the methyl mercury poisoning will be mitigated. And we have Nalcor and government saying not ready to do that. They're already spending 12.7 billion on a disaster.
I did not see. Was that today?
Yeah, it was yesterday. So they're actually rejecting or proposing to reject the need for that, and that's something I learned in Labrador. What that issue is really about? That is, it's more or less destroying a way of life. Not only is it poisoning land and water, it's destroying a way of life of human beings whose perhaps their existence doesn't depend on it. Maybe we could subsidize them. They could go eat craft dinner or something, as Nick Whalen said in that embarrassing tweet. But they won't have their culture. So we're destroying a culture as well. And we're doing it needlessly. We're doing it for profit incentives. We're doing it because we want to save another 800 million. Sounds like a lot of money, but it isn't when you're spending 13 billion.
But also the entire project is not going to make us money.
It isn't.
Many people think.
We might as well, do it in the least damaging way possible. So, that's something that I learned in Labrador. Everything I know about Muskrat Falls I learned in that trip to Labrador, because we just haven't been getting the information.
Yes, I think if there is anything that good to come out of Muskrat Falls, and I think it would be that it is the island and Labrador are beginning to come together, and not out of any kind of brotherly love or anything, but because the island has things at stake, as well as Labrador. Yeah. And so it may not have began with brotherly love, but what is happening is that we are learning and coming together, and the more we learn, the more, authentic the desire to do the right thing turns out to be.
My hope is that this ecological and economic disaster will be the occasion for the recreation of our democracy. And I don't think we've ever really had a proper democracy here. So.
Well, with that, I want to thank you so much, Sean.
Thanks for this opportunity.
Wow, what a great way to end. I'm so deeply grateful. Thank you.
I'm grateful for you for doing this. So thanks so much for your service.
I also want to thank Janet Herron and Cole Haley, because we couldn't be here without you. You guys, they're on the other side of the fourth wall. And I want to say that our next State of the Arts will be with Elizabeth Demiriafi and George Murray. They were the writers in residence this semester, and they're going to talk about their new books, and they are fantastic. Thank you all.